You are listening to the ERP, Organizational Change Journal, a podcast brought to you by Nestle and Associates.
So in terms of leaders elevating their leadership quality, what would be the first step that a leader must take in terms of this? I guess it would be vertical development, right? So I'm a leader. You had mentioned in your first response that sometimes leaders get caught up in their more technical role of their job. Doctors be good doctors and engineers want to be good engineers, and you practice your trade. But at the same time, if you're a leader, it is true. There's a lot out there, both in the form of anecdotal evidence, but also in terms of research. But how do we get there? How do we take that next step? Or I should say, what would be the very first step for leaders in terms of vertical development?
So I want to level set because I think the term vertical development isn't a commonly understood term, or
Yeah.
people have different meanings for it. So vertical is actually, if we think about Jim Collins and the idea of level 5 leadership, that there are actually shifts in our meaning-making algorithm. So if we think about how we made sense of the world when we graduated from high school and how that changed to graduated from college, and how that changed after you had your first child, as an example, for people who've done that path, we actually start to see the world differently. And vertical is that difference in meaning making, where horizontal is getting better at our craft, and both are required. So I realize that some of my work preferences vertical because there are a lot of people doing a great job already at horizontal. So with that as the grounding, one of the first things I recommend is start with understanding a vertical model. So what does this mean? And the research says just by even understanding the model, people can start in their minds moving toward the next step because they know what more effective looks like and they know what less effective looks like. And I'm going to take a risk here and suggest that more effective and less effective in the leadership realm, that this isn't a place where we actually need evidence-based models. And during an era where our environment, especially political environment, is so divisive, I don't think we as organizational leaders have a shared view of what effective looks like. So if you think our current president is brilliant, then you thought the last guy was not. If you thought the last guy is brilliant, you're really worried right now. So that points to a significant difference when we walk in the door at work every day. We've got, let's call it a 50-50 split. I don't know what the real numbers are, but relatively equal amounts of people who think one thing is good and who think something very different is good. So if I'm running an organization, I want to bring people together around how we define effective. So pick a model. I happen to think the vertical development models are foundational. And there's some research that says if people aren't at a certain level of maturity, they are unlikely to transform and sustain multiple transformations. So we've all seen people by brute force who change stuff. The question is, 5 years from now, will that change stick and will people be building on it? And will it continue to make the organization better? So all of that as the context, understand the model, understand what I'm looking toward, and then take an assessment. And there are a few really good assessments. One is the MAP by, I'm going to say vertical development, the Stages model by Stages International, and Stage Shift at stageshift.coach. The first two are incredibly robust, human scored, more expensive, and take longer to get, but really hard to game. So when you get a score, if I am not self-aware, my lack of self-awareness doesn't translate to the score. On any assessment where I self-score, so I answer a bunch of multiple choice questions, for many people, especially super smart leaders, it's easy to project where I think I'm supposed to be versus where I am. And so I am cautious in my recommendations with regard to how precise I need to be in my scoring. If I'm working with a senior executive and I'm looking at succession, precision may be more important. If I'm working with someone who's developing as a leader, they're doing great, we're just looking at moving them to the next level, precision may not be as important. And so we can do a different assessment that is less expensive, easier, because I take a multiple choice assessment and I get my score back immediately. So I do balance, and I think all of them, the three I recommended, are all really good choices. Last thing, then once I
Sure.
know my score, work with a coach or a team partner. It doesn't require paying a coach. What I need is somebody who understands the framework, goes through it with me, and is preferably slightly higher on the scale than I am, so they can model the behaviors that I'm trying to reach.
That is interesting. Maureen, I really liked what you said to start off the answer to the question. So thank you for that. But it was the idea of horizontal and vertical development and kind of level setting on the idea of vertical development. Great point. And I really liked your point, this idea of level setting on the definition of effective leadership. That was a great point and great insight. And I think that if I had to summarize, and I don't want to do your insight improper justice, but if I had to distill your response into a sentence, would this be fair? It would be to understand the model, understand what you are working. In other words, understand what your goals are, right? Understand what you mean by leadership, but then you need to be willing to reflect and then measure. And then once you do that, you need to execute intentional practice.
Perfect summation. And let me add one additional piece, because we're such a competitive society that we think higher is better. This, especially vertical, is about fit for role.
Yeah.
So you don't want Albert Einstein as your receptionist.
Right.
Right? You don't want your Dalai Lama as the Dalai Lama as your CEO, because he probably doesn't care about quarterly profits.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
are just mismatches where, especially with vertical development, too developed isn't good for every job.